Story 1. I had a member of staff, M, try to force himself onto another staff member, F. She chose not to press charges. That didn't sit right with me. To preface, I live in a country that employs a large foreign expat workforce in pretty much every industry and in all levels. For someone to move here for work, they have to be sponsored by a company or the individual that's employing them. I own and operate a small restaurant business here and employ more than a handful of foreigners as servers, cleaners, kitchen staff, drivers, etc. So here's the story. I was lounging on my couch enjoying the last of my weekend one day when I get a call from telling me that one of our sponsored employees, a server, let's call her Janice, was picked up for indecent exposure, essentially. Long story short, she was caught hooking up with a guy in a private booth at a local restaurant. Basically, the police walked in on them whilst engaged in some seriously heavy petting. They were fully clothed, but the guy she was with, or practically on top of I should say, has his junk out. Turns out he works at the restaurant 2 doors down from where she worked. After a bit of chastising and threatening to escalate the situation and have them deported to sufficiently scare their senses back into them, they let them go, but not before signing a pledge-type document promising to never repeat the offense. Or else. A slap on the wrist, basically, and everyone got to go home. But it doesn't end there. That night something clicked in my brain, and I had the thought, how and why did the police find them in a private booth in the back of a restaurant before the restaurant's own staff did? So I called the restaurant the next day. I thought maybe they called the police on them immediately for some reason. Or maybe the couple got belligerent when staff asked him to stop. Turns out the staff didn't notice a thing. In fact, up until that day, the police have never been to that restaurant before. And when they did, they simply walked in, went straight to the back booths where the two were sat and busted right in. I realized this meant that someone must have seen them and called the cops on them point blank. The question was who? I decided to speak to Janice. I wanted to speak to her anyway that day, both to check in and get her version of the situation. I also gave her the employer, "You know you did something stupid," chat and reassure her that she's keeping her job. I also wanted to ask her who she thought called her in. Without hesitation, she said it had to be Sammy, who was one of our drivers. "Why do you think it was Sammy?" I asked. "He's the one that dropped me off at the restaurant that day. He might have seen my friend Rend walk in right after me and called the police on us," she said. I knew the part of him dropping her off was true, that literally his job and her only free mode of transport. Well, that sounds a bit drastic. Why would he do that even if he had seen you do anything? I asked. She claimed it was because he was jealous. He was really into her apparently and kept trying to get her into bed, she said. What genuinely pissed me off was when she told me that he actually tried to force himself on her once, and she fought him off, and that he hasn't tried or even said anything since other than be very short and curt with her. My immediate response was, "Why on earth would you not tell me or one of your managers right away?" She said she had dealt with it her way, and it stopped. Plus, she didn't want anybody to get fired on her account, and she didn't want any interaction with the authorities, so she decided not to make a big deal out of it in the first place. She also declined to press formal charges against him, which I advised her to do. Her declining infuriated me even more. This guy was going to get off scot-free. Now clearly I was about to fire Sami, but in my mind that wasn't enough. For someone to attempt to rape a person basically and not get in trouble for it, not okay with me. But it seemed like it was something I had to live with. Obviously, my next conversation of the day was with Sami. My intent was to confront him with the accusations. I called him into my office. I didn't really know where to start, so I went with, "Obviously you've heard about what happened to Janice this weekend?" He stepped in it right away. "Heard about it?" came the unexpectedly proud response from a proud AF and positively beaming Sammy. I called it in. And this is where it started to get super satisfying. You see, for a couple of years since I met Sammy, every now and then, he would pull out and show us all pictures of his wife, who was back home living with his mother. She was younger than him and quite beautiful, but sadly barren, which is apparently why she settled with an older fart like him. He was so proud of how pretty she was. He was also a devout religious man, or so he claimed. So I asked, and why call the police? He came back with, after I dropped her off, I waited to see who she was meeting because she's a troublemaker woman. When I saw the man walk in after her, I call police because I know him, and he is married, and this is against the laws of God and man. I'm smiling now. I knew I got him. Why do that instead of calling your direct manager, or even me, and before even seeing for yourself what they were doing exactly at that? Why make it my problem and the company's problem what she does in her own time? Silence. Head down counting his shoes. Sammy, I know why. I know what you did. Janice just told me. I'm disgusted by you and sorry that we hired you. He had the audacity to mumble, I only tried once, sir. I almost slapped him. Anyways, I fired him, handed him a one-way ticket home, which was in 4 hours, and told him to GTFO. This is where I get my not-so-petty revenge. I had his house phone number saved somewhere from we hired him. It was on his CV. I knew that because I called him there to interview him before we first hired him. I waited until his flight took off and dialed the number. I assumed either his mother or wife would answer the call, but I was wishing for the latter. I got my wish. Hello, Mrs. Sammy. I'm your husband's employer. Well, his former employer anyway. Just so you know, I fired him a few hours ago and he's on a flight home as we speak. His flight number is XXX. He will be arriving at XXXX. Just so you are aware, I was forced to fire him because he attempted to rape a fellow employee half his age. I'm sorry, I said, and promptly hung up, but not before hearing her gasping in shock. Hey everyone. Today, I've got to react to this wild story a small restaurant owner shared. So this guy owns a restaurant and employs a lot of foreign workers, and one of his servers, Janice, got caught in a pretty sticky situation. Basically, the police found her and a guy in a private booth at another restaurant, getting a little too cozy. What's really bizarre here is how the police found them before the restaurant staff did. This owner digs a little deeper and figures out Janice's ride, Sammy, a driver at his restaurant, might have ratted them out because he was jealous. Apparently, Sammy had a thing for Janice, and when she didn't reciprocate, he called the cops on her. Janice didn't want Sammy to get in trouble because she's got her reasons, but this owner is fed up and confronts Sammy. This part's insane. Sammy proudly admits he called the police because he thought it was the right thing to do morally. This owner had enough and decided to fire Sammy, but that's not all. He calls Sammy's wife back home to spill the beans about why Sammy got fired. Talk about revenge. What do you guys think? Do you think the owner's actions were justified? This story has so many layers. Workplace dynamics, jealousy, ethics. It's just wild. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Story 2. Former manager made my life hell, and I finally got her fired. I was desperate to join a new job after my husband and I were both laid off last year. When I was offered a new role, I knew it would be a step down from what I was doing, but the manager and the team seemed great, and that part has not changed. However, since my manager Gary was so busy, he basically offloaded me to another manager, Jane. I was supposed to be the connection point between my team and Jane, but it quickly became Jane micromanaging me. She would ask me to work through lunch, move, cancel vacation days, call at 11 p.m. on weekends, and order me around on phone calls. She also made nasty comments about my weight and said I was big for my race. The list of personal slights so long that it filled 3 pages. I would talk back to her and she did not like that, and that provoked her more. I only stayed because we needed to pay the bills. Finally, I had a mental breakdown on a Friday afternoon, after she yelled at me for something trivial about scheduling a meeting without including someone from her team who I didn't know about. I was dealing with a family tragedy and couldn't take it anymore. I told Gary about the situation with Jane, and he was sympathetic and not at all surprised, considering half her team quit. He immediately offered to move me to a different team under him. I was thrilled. Well, turns out going to the new team didn't help. Jane continued to order me around from afar. When I ignored her emails, she came to my desk one day and started loudly talking about how I am not qualified for this role. Gary overheard and finally told her off, but the verbal abuse did not stop. After 2 months there, I abruptly wrote my resignation letter and stapled the list of Jane's offensive comments and CC'd everyone. Gary offered a bunch of accommodations to try to keep me, but seeing how she was still provoking from afar, I said the only way for me to stay would be for her to go, and he did not have authority to let her go. Her manager was in a different country, and despite several HR complaints from at least 5 people, nothing was done. So I left, loudly and without shame, telling everyone exactly why I was leaving. Times were very bad for 3 months. There were nights we would eat slices of bread just so we could pay the mortgage and emergency expenses from a health crisis and a funeral. Even after he found a job, we were still catching up on bills and still are. I spent months applying to 5 to 10 roles per day, sometimes over 20. Last month, I saw a public memo about a big shot from a former company joining the company I just left. I used to work with this guy closely and texted him a, "Congrats, let me know if you need any insights on the new place." We had a quick call where I told him some ins and outs, where I thought they could innovate. After this call, he asked me to join the team as his chief of staff. I accepted. Imagine Jane's shock when we had our first all-hands call. All the VPs and above were asked to welcome the new big shot in a giant conference room. In Big Shot's speech, he breezed over that I'll be his chief of staff, along with a few key names. I now sat 2 levels above Jane, and apparently, within the 3 months I was not there, the other half of her team turned over. Every single person left. Gary was excited for me and said all nice things. However, Jane took the classless route and sent Big Shot an email about how I'm an unqualified idiot, that I used to work for her, how I tried to get her fired, and that she suspects I lied to get ahead. She didn't even try to be fake nice. Big Shot forwarded me her email and asked what this was about. I was so nervous and excited. Little did Jane know, I was a director at Big Shot's competitor company and was already a level above her, so 2 levels isn't a big leap, and I worked with him for 5 years. I had an hour call with Big Shot and told him she was bad for the company culture and was a nasty person in general. But the evidence he needed was Gary confirming that her whole team has turned over. My prior resignation letter, which was still sitting on my desktop when I logged in upon return, and a few other nasty emails she sent her recent staff, which they were happy to share with us. Big Shot fired Jane on Friday. Wow, okay, first of all, what a roller coaster of a story. I mean, imagine being in that situation where you're just trying to make ends meet and you have to deal with someone like Jane. Honestly, Jane sounds like a nightmare manager. It's really shocking how someone can be so toxic and still keep their job despite multiple complaints. It's interesting to see how Gary seemed somewhat aware of Jane's behavior, but couldn't really do much about it because her manager was in a different country. Like, that's a pretty significant loophole in corporate oversight. Anyone else experience something like this? Let me know in the comments. Also, I find it really satisfying that even after such a tough journey, the protagonist not only found a way out, but came back stronger. It's amazing how things turned around with that one call to the Big Shot from their former company. It's like, talk about being at the right place at the right time, and that too with the right connections. Jane's reaction was priceless, though. Sending that email to the Big Shot, thinking she could smear the new chief of staff, only to have it backfire spectacularly. Karma, right? So what do you guys think? How would you have handled this if you were in the protagonist's shoes? And does anyone have work stories that are as crazy as this? Share them below, and maybe we'll react to some of them in the next video. Story 3. Try to steal my legally rented parking spot? Enjoy being unemployed. This happened last night. I'm now in a good enough spot to actually post this. I'm not quite sure if it qualifies as pro, but it definitely isn't petty. I am a professional driver. As such, on the roads in the US, there are different truck stops throughout the country that has a pay-to-park system, usually about 10 to 20% of the lot marked off as reserved, with each space running from $15 to $25. The truck stop where this took place had parking for $17, which is relatively cheap for a guaranteed spot. The spots are reserved for 24 hours, starting at 4 p.m. local time and extending to 3 p.m. the following afternoon. I knew that I would have a late-night delivery, so I came to the truck stop around 3:30 and paid for a reserve spot. I told the manager on duty that I had a delivery up the road that night and would be back once delivery was completed, but should still be able to clear out the spot by the next afternoon, today. She told me that this was okay and she would mark the spot as sold when I left. That way, if someone else comes in trying to reserve that spot, she could consult her notes and deny the sale. 11:50 p.m. rolls around. I take off for my delivery. I don't get out of that facility until 2:30 a.m. this morning. So, I groggily drive back to the truck stop to reclaim my paid-for spot, only to find that the reserved parking spaces are all full. I call the manager on duty, and after giving her my info, inform her that all the spots are full and that someone has parked in a spot and hasn't paid for it. She sends her other employee out to start checking trucks. The culprit was from a company that is known for their bright orange trailers, and he was a company driver. The other employee starts banging on his door to inform him that he is parked illegally and he has to move. Meanwhile, I can see the commotion from my mirror with my vantage point in the fuel island, where I had been instructed to temporarily park. The driver answers the door with a bottle of Heineken in one hand and some sort of smoking implement in another. I know what it is, but for the sake of the mods, I'm not going to say it. I decided to roll down the window to hear the commotion, and I hear the employee tell the driver to either move or he will get the towing company and police involved. This driver is flat out irate that someone had the audacity to tell him where he can and cannot park, so he slams the door on the employee, threatening him. Employee calls the police and tow company, and the police show up first. I had worked for this company before, so I know their policies, and more importantly, what they can and cannot have in their trucks. Alcoholic beverages are not allowed in the cab. Anything that isn't a cigarette or a cigar and a lighter, also not allowed. The coup de grace, a pew-pew of any kind, absolutely not allowed, and especially not allowed loaded. This driver had all that and some other not-so-legal substances in his cab, so he was hauled away in cuffs. His truck was hauled away on a wrecker. I made a call after the commotion died down to the company safety director and informed them that their rig will be in an impound lot and their driver is going to jail over the not-so-legal stuff he had in his truck. She thanked me and said that he will definitely lose his job, especially over the alcohol and the other not-so-legal stuff. I guess he played the screw around and find out card, and it bit him in his career. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I've got this crazy story from a professional truck driver, so let's dive in. This trucker had a late-night delivery and knew he'd get back super late, so he reserved a parking spot at a truck stop for $17. That's pretty smart, right? Ensures he has a place to park when he gets back. But after his delivery, he returns to find all the reserved spots taken. Oof, that's gotta be frustrating. He calls the manager, and they find out one of the trucks took the spot illegally. Here comes the twist. The driver of the illegally parked truck is holding a Heineken and something else when approached. What's up with that? Things escalate. The guy isn't just illegally parked. He's breaking a bunch of company rules with alcohol, some sort of smoking stuff, and other illegal items in his cab. The police get involved, and it turns out this driver is in serious trouble. He gets hauled off in cuffs while his truck gets towed. What I find interesting here is how quickly things spiraled because of one bad decision. The trucker also called the safety director of the company, ensuring the driver would lose his job. What do you guys think of this story? Ever had something like this happen to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more reactions.